It is past midnight on May 8, 1945, and inside a cramped factory floor in Brynlitz, Czechoslovakia, over 1,100 Jewish workers stand in absolute silence, their faces illuminated by the dim glow of overhead bulbs that cast long shadows across the concrete floor. The air smells of machine oil, metal shavings, and something else, something unspoken but palpable, the scent of freedom mixed with terror. Outside, the sounds of distant artillery rumble through the hills as the Soviet Red Army advances from the east, and the Third Reich, once the most powerful military machine on earth, crumbles into ash and blood. These workers, hollow-eyed and skeletal, dressed in threadbare striped uniforms, have survived the impossible. They have survived Plazow concentration camp, where the commandant shot prisoners for sport from his villa balcony. They have survived cattle car transports to Auschwitz, Birkenau, where the chimneys never stopped smoking. They have survived starvation, disease, beatings, and the daily lottery of death that defined life under the swastika. And now, standing before them on a makeshift stage, is the man who saved them all, a tall, broad, shouldered German in an expensive suit, his face flushed from alcohol and emotion, his hands trembling as he clutches a piece of paper. His name is Oskar Schindler, and he is a member of the Nazi Party. He is also the reason these 1,100 Jews are still breathing. Schindler clears his throat, and the factory falls even quieter, if such a thing is possible. He speaks in German, his voice thick and unsteady, and his words are translated into Yiddish and Polish by those who stand closest. He tells them the war is over. He tells them the Germans have surrendered. He tells them they are free, but then his voice breaks, and he says something that will haunt every person in that room for the rest of their lives. He tells them he must leave. He tells them that as a Nazi Party member and a German industrialist who profited from the war, he will be arrested by the Soviets if he stays. He tells them he must flee west toward the American lines and that he will likely never see them again. And then, in a moment that defies the entire machinery of hate and genocide that consumed Europe for 6 years, Oskar Schindler, war profiteer, spy, womanizer, and member of Hitler's party, begins to weep. He sobs openly in front of the workers, his shoulders shaking, and through his tears he says the words that will be remembered forever. He wishes he had done more. He wishes he had saved more. He looks down at the gold Nazi Party pin on his lapel, the small circular badge with the swastika that marked him as a loyal member of the regime, and he says that pin could have bought 2 more lives. He looks at his car parked outside, a luxury vehicle he purchased with bribes and black market money, and he says that car could have bought 10 more lives. Every extravagance, every indulgence, every moment he didn't sacrifice. He calculates it now in human souls, and the math destroys him. The workers do not move. Some weep silently. Others stare in disbelief. This is not how they expected the war to end. They expected liberation, yes, but they did not expect this raw, unfiltered guilt from the man who saved them. They did not expect their savior to be a Nazi. They did not expect their Nazi to be a saint. One of the workers, a man named Itzhak Stern, steps forward. Stern is Schindler's accountant, his right-hand man, his conscience when Schindler's own conscience was still sleeping. Stern has been with Schindler since the beginning, since the days in Krakow when Schindler was just another German opportunist looking to get rich off Jewish slave labor. Stern has watched Schindler transform from a man who didn't care about Jewish suffering to a man who risked everything to stop it. And now, in this final moment, Stern presents Schindler with a gift. It is a ring, forged in secret by the workers using gold fillings pulled from their own teeth. Engraved on the inside is a line from the Talmud, written in Hebrew, "Whoever saves one life saves the world entire." Schindler stares at the ring, turning it over in his fingers, and the weight of it, not the physical weight, but the moral weight, breaks him completely. He collapses into Stern's arms, sobbing, and the workers surround him, reaching out to touch his coat, his hands, his shoulders, as if trying to anchor him to the earth before he floats away into guilt and history. Minutes later, Schindler climbs into his car, accompanied by his wife Emily and a small group of workers who will escort him to safety. The car's engine roars to life, and the headlights cut through the darkness as it pulls away from the factory. The workers stand in the courtyard, watching the taillights disappear into the night, and they know they will never see him again. They are right. Oskar Schindler, the Nazi who saved 1,200 Jews, will spend the rest of his life in obscurity, poverty, and alcoholism, never recovering from the war or the weight of what he did and didn't do. But those 1,200 Jews will survive, and they will have children, and those children will have children, and today, 79 years later, more than 8,500 descendants of Schindler's Jews live across the world, in Israel, in America, in Europe, in Australia. A living testament to the power of one man's decision to choose humanity over ideology, conscience over comfort, and redemption over complicity. But who was Oskar Schindler before he became a hero? How does a man go from failed businessman and Nazi spy to the savior of over 1,000 lives? What happened in the years between 1939 and 1945 that transformed a morally ambiguous war profiteer into one of the most celebrated rescuers in history? And why, after saving so many, did he spend his final years alone, broke and haunted by the lives he didn't save? This is the story of Oskar Schindler, the Nazi who saved 200,000 lives, and the impossible mission that defined his existence. This is the story of transformation, guilt, heroism, and the strange, uncomfortable truth that sometimes the people who do the most good are not the people we expect. Sometimes they are deeply flawed, broken, selfish individuals who, for reasons even they don't fully understand, choose to do the right thing when it costs them everything. And sometimes that choice echoes across generations, creating ripples of life where there should have been only death. Oskar Schindler is born on April 28, 1908, in the small industrial town of Svitavi, then called Zwickau, located in the Sudetenland region of Austria, Hungary, a place where German-speaking families live alongside Czech neighbors in an uneasy cultural mix that will explode into violence and nationalism in the coming decades. His father, Hans Schindler, owns a farm machinery business, and the family is comfortably middle class, neither wealthy nor poor, but stable enough to afford a decent home, good food, and the expectation that young Oskar will one day take over the family business. Oskar's mother, Franziska, known as Fanny, is a devout Catholic who attends Mass regularly and instills in her children a sense of morality and faith that Oskar will later ignore almost entirely during his youth. Oskar has one younger sister, Elfrid, and the two children grow up in a household that is typical for the time, structured, traditional, and deeply influenced by the social and political currents of the early 20th century. The Schindler family is ethnically German, and like many Sudeten Germans, they feel a sense of separation from their Czech neighbors, a feeling that will intensify as the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapses after World War I, and the newly formed Czechoslovakia struggles to unify its divergent population. Oskar is a charming child, handsome and charismatic, even as a boy, with a natural ability to talk his way into and out of situations that would land other children in serious trouble. He is not a particularly good student, and his teachers note that he is intelligent but lazy, more interested in socializing and playing than in studying or following rules. He is popular with his classmates, especially the girls, and even in his teenage years, he develops a reputation as a smooth talker and a bit of a rogue. He attends a German language trade school where he studies engineering and business, but he shows little passion for academics and barely graduates. What Oskar does show passion for is motorcycles. He becomes obsessed with them, spending hours tinkering with engines, racing through the countryside, and dreaming of speed and adventure. He competes in local motorcycle races and even achieves some regional success, winning a few events and earning a minor reputation as a daredevil. For a brief moment, it seems possible that Oskar Schindler might become a professional racer, traveling the world and living the kind of glamorous, adrenaline-fueled life that appeals to his restless, thrill-seeking personality. But the dream dies quickly, as most dreams do when they collide with reality. Oskar crashes badly during a race, injuring himself, and his parents insist he abandon the sport and focus on something more practical. Reluctantly, he agrees, and his brief flirtation with fame and glory ends before it truly begins. In 1928, at the age of 20, Oskar marries a young woman named Emily Pelzel, the daughter of a prosperous farmer from a nearby village. Emily is pretty, devout and practical, everything Oskar is not, and the marriage seems doomed from the start. Oskar marries her not out of love, but because Emily's father offers a substantial dowry, and Oskar sees the marriage as a financial opportunity. Emily, for her part, is infatuated with Oskar's charm and good looks, and she believes she can tame him, settle him down, and turn him into a responsible husband and father. She is wrong. From the very beginning, Oskar is unfaithful, spending his nights drinking in taverns, gambling, and chasing other women. He is a serial womanizer, unable or unwilling to resist the attention of any woman who shows interest in him, and his affairs are numerous and shameless. Emily, heartbroken and humiliated, endures the marriage in silence, clinging to her Catholic faith and hoping that Oskar will change. He never does. The marriage survives barely, but it is a hollow shell, a legal contract more than a partnership, and Emily spends much of her life lonely and neglected, married to a man who is physically present but emotionally absent. Oskar takes a job working for his father's farm machinery business, but he is a terrible employee. He is unreliable, showing up late or not at all, and he has little interest in the day-to-day operations of the company. What he does have is a talent for sales and schmoozing. He can walk into a room full of strangers and within minutes have them laughing, buying drinks and signing contracts. He is a natural salesman, gifted with the kind of easy charisma that makes people trust him even when they shouldn't. But his charm is not enough to save the business. The global economic collapse of the Great Depression hits Europe hard, and the Schindler family company struggles to survive. Orders dry up, debts pile up, and by the early 1930s, the business is on the verge of bankruptcy. Oskar's father blames him, not entirely unfairly, for the company's decline, and the relationship between father and son deteriorates into bitterness and resentment. Hans Schindler is a stern, practical man who believes in hard work and discipline, and he sees his son as a lazy, irresponsible playboy who wastes every opportunity given to him. Oskar, for his part, resents his father's judgment and feels trapped in a small town, in a failing business, in a loveless marriage, in a life that offers no excitement, no glory, no escape. He drinks more, he gambles more, he sleeps with more women, and he begins to look for a way out. The way out arrives in the form of politics, specifically the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in neighboring Germany. By the mid-1930s, Hitler has consolidated power in Germany, and his message of German racial superiority, national revival, and territorial expansion resonates deeply with many ethnic Germans living outside Germany's borders, including the Sudeten Germans in Czechoslovakia. The Sudeten German Party, a pro-Nazi political movement, gains massive popularity in the region, and Oskar Schindler, like many of his neighbours, is swept up in the excitement. He joins the party, not out of any deep ideological commitment to Nazism or anti-Semitism, but because it is fashionable, because it promises a return to German greatness, and because it offers opportunities for ambitious men willing to align themselves with the winning side. Schindler is nothing if not opportunistic, and he sees in the Nazi movement a chance to escape his stagnant life and reinvent himself as something more than a failed businessman in a dying town. He begins attending rallies, socializing with party members, and making connections with influential figures in the Sudeten German political scene. And in 1936, he takes a step that will change his life forever. He becomes a spy for the Abwehr, the German military intelligence service. Schindler's work for the Abwehr is low, level and unglamorous, nothing like the James Bond adventures he might have imagined. His job is to gather information on Czech military installations, railroads and border defenses, and to report back to his German handlers. He travels frequently, posing as a businessman, and uses his natural charm and language skills to extract information from officials, soldiers, and workers who have no idea they are being interrogated. He is good at it. He is likable, trustworthy, and skilled at making people feel comfortable enough to talk. But he is also reckless. In 1938, as tensions between Germany and Czechoslovakia escalate, Schindler is arrested by Czech authorities on suspicion of espionage. He is briefly imprisoned, interrogated, and released due to lack of concrete evidence, but the arrest is a close call, and it should have been a warning. It is not. Oskar Schindler does not learn caution. He learns only that he can talk his way out of almost anything, a lesson that will serve him well in the years to come, but one that also reinforces his belief that he is invincible, untouchable, and immune to consequences. It is a dangerous belief, but in the chaos of the coming war, it will also be the belief that allows him to take the kinds of risks that save lives. In September 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and French Premier Edouard Daladier meet with Adolf Hitler in Munich and agree to allow Germany to annex the Sudetenland in exchange for Hitler's promise not to pursue further territorial expansion in Europe. It is a cowardly betrayal of Czechoslovakia, and the Munich Agreement becomes synonymous with the failure of appeasement. For Oskar Schindler, however, the annexation is a personal victory. Overnight, his hometown becomes part of Nazi Germany, and he is no longer a Czech citizen but a German citizen, no longer a member of a persecuted minority but a member of the master race. The Nazis reward their Sudeten German supporters with jobs, contracts and opportunities, and Schindler, with his party membership and intelligence connections, is well positioned to benefit. But the real opportunity does not arrive until September 1939, when Hitler's armies invade Poland and World War II begins. Schindler sees the invasion not as a tragedy, but as a chance, and he makes plans to travel to the newly occupied Polish city of Krakow, where fortunes are being made by German entrepreneurs exploiting the chaos and seizing Jew-owned businesses for pennies on the dollar. Oskar Schindler is heading to war not to fight but to profit, and in doing so he will stumble into a moral awakening that neither he nor anyone who knows him could have possibly predicted. When Oskar Schindler arrives in Krakow in the autumn of 1939, the city is in chaos. Just weeks earlier, it was the thriving cultural and intellectual heart of Poland, a city of universities, theatres, cafes and synagogues, home to 60,000 Jews who had lived there for centuries. Now it is the administrative capital of the general government, the Nazi-controlled zone of occupied Poland, and the city is unrecognizable. German soldiers patrol the streets. Swastika banners hang from every building. Polish street signs are torn down and replaced with German ones. And everywhere there are new rules, new restrictions, new humiliations designed to remind the conquered population that they are no longer citizens but subjects, no longer people but things to be used and discarded at the whim of their occupiers. For Jews, the situation is far worse. Within days of the German invasion, Jewish shops are looted, Jewish homes are seized, and Jewish men are rounded up for forced labor. The Nazis are not subtle about their intentions. They make it clear from the very beginning that Jews are enemies of the Reich, subhuman parasites who must be eliminated from German-controlled territory one way or another. But in 1939, the final solution has not yet been implemented, and the mass extermination camps are still years away. For now, the Nazi policy is simpler: exploit Jewish labor, confiscate Jewish property, and force Jews into ghettos where they can be controlled. starved, and eventually disposed of when they are no longer useful. Oskar Schindler does not come to Krakow to help Jews. He comes to get rich, and he is not alone. The city is flooded with German opportunists, carpetbaggers who see the war as a chance to seize businesses, factories, and real estate from their Polish and Jewish owners at absurdly low prices. The Nazis encourage this, actively transferring ownership of Jewish businesses to loyal German party members in a process they call Aryanization. It is state, sanctioned theft, legalized plunder, and it makes fortunes for men like Schindler. He arrives in Krakow with almost no money, living in cheap hotels and borrowed apartments, surviving on charm, connections, and the occasional bribe. He spends his days networking with Nazi officials, schmoozing with SS officers, and scanning the city for business opportunities. He drinks heavily, gambles, and sleeps with multiple women, including several mistresses he sets up in apartments across the city. Emily, his long, suffering wife, remains back in Moravia, alone and ignored, while Oskar lives the life of a bachelor war profiteer. He is, by all accounts, having the time of his life. What Schindler needs is a factory, something he can acquire cheaply and operate using Jewish slave labor, which costs almost nothing because Jews are paid starvation wages or not paid at all. He finds exactly what he is looking for: a bankrupt enamelware factory called Record Limited, located in the Zablocki district on the outskirts of Krakow. The factory produces metal pots, pans, and kitchenware, and before the war it was owned by Jewish investors who have now been forced to sell. Schindler does not have the money to buy it outright, but he does not need to. He is a master of persuasion, and he convinces a group of wealthy Jewish businessmen to secretly finance the purchase in exchange for his promise to protect them and their families from deportation. It is a deal born of desperation on their part and opportunism on his. The Jews hand over their money, Schindler takes ownership of the factory, and in early 1940, he reopens it under a new name, Deutsche Emailenwarenfabrik, or Emalia for short. He is now a factory owner, an industrialist, a member of the Nazi economic machine, and he is making money, a lot of it, by paying his Jewish workers almost nothing and selling his enamelware to the German military at inflated prices. To manage the factory's finances and operations, Schindler hires an accountant named Itzhak Stern. Stern is a Polish Jew, middle-aged, balding, bespectacled, and brilliant. He is cautious, meticulous, and deeply intelligent, everything Schindler is not, and the two men form an unlikely partnership. Stern handles the books, the permits, the paperwork, all the tedious details that Schindler has no patience for. But Stern is more than just an accountant. He is also a witness, a moral compass, and eventually a co-conspirator. Stern sees immediately what Schindler is, a Nazi profiteer using Jewish suffering to get rich, but he also sees potential. He sees a German who, unlike most Germans, does not treat Jews with open cruelty. He sees a man who can be influenced, manipulated, and perhaps, just perhaps, transformed. So Stern begins a quiet campaign to awaken Schindler's conscience. He brings him Jewish workers who are elderly, disabled, or otherwise unproductive, and therefore at risk of being sent to labor camps or killed, and he asks Schindler to hire them, to classify them as essential workers, so they will be protected. Schindler agrees, not out of compassion, but because it costs him nothing, and because Stern's careful management of the factory's finances is making Schindler richer every month. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something begins to change. Schindler starts to learn the names of his workers. He starts to ask about their families. He starts to see them not as anonymous labor units, but as human beings. It is not a sudden conversion, not a moment of blinding moral clarity, but a gradual, uncomfortable awakening, and it is Itzhak Stern who midwifes it into existence. By 1941, Schindler's factory is thriving. He has nearly 300 workers, most of them Jews pulled from the Krakow ghetto, and he is producing thousands of pots and pans for the German army. He lives extravagantly, wearing expensive suits, driving a luxury car, hosting parties in his apartment where SS officers drink his imported whiskey and flirt with his mistresses. He bribes officials constantly, handing out cash, liquor, diamonds, and black market goods to ensure that his factory operates smoothly and that he stays in the good graces of the Nazi authorities. He is shameless, corrupt, and morally ambiguous, a man who profits from the suffering of others while simultaneously beginning to protect them. He is not yet a hero. He is not even a good man. He is something stranger and more complicated, a man in transition, caught between greed and conscience, exploitation and salvation, a man who has not yet decided what kind of person he will become. And then, in March 1941, the Nazis force all of Krakow's Jews into a walled ghetto, and Oskar Schindler is forced to confront the full horror of the regime he serves. The Krakow ghetto is established in March 1940, one in the Podgorze district, a run-down neighborhood south of the Vistula River that before the war housed 3,000 people. Now, the Nazis cram over 15,000 Jews into the same space, forcing multiple families to share single rooms in buildings that are crumbling, unheated, and infested with vermin. The ghetto is surrounded by a high wall topped with barbed wire, and the shape of the wall, cruel and symbolic, is designed to resemble Jewish tombstones, a not-so-subtle message about the fate awaiting those trapped inside. Jews are allowed to leave the ghetto only if they have work permits, and those without permits are confined 24 hours a day in conditions that deteriorate rapidly into squalor, disease, and starvation. Food rations are set deliberately low, just enough to keep people alive for forced labor, but not enough to sustain them long-term. Typhus spreads through the ghetto, killing hundreds. Children beg in the streets. Bodies are found frozen in doorways every morning. The ghetto is not a neighborhood. It is a slow-motion death sentence, a holding pen where Jews wait to be worked to death, starved to death, or deported to something even worse. Oskar Schindler's factory workers are among the lucky ones. They have work permits that allow them to leave the ghetto every morning, march under guard to the Emalia factory, work 12-hour shifts, and then march back in the evening. For them, the factory is a lifeline. Inside its walls, they are relatively safe from the random violence and arbitrary executions that plague the ghetto. Schindler feeds them better than the official rations allow, not out of kindness, but because well-fed workers are more productive, and Schindler is still, at this point, primarily motivated by profit. But he is beginning to see the ghetto, and what he sees disturbs him. He drives past it regularly on his way to meetings with Nazi officials, and he cannot help but notice the armed guards, the barbed wire, the emaciated faces pressed against windows, the children with swollen bellies and hollow eyes. He hears stories from his workers, stories of beatings, of families torn apart, of people disappearing in the night. And he begins to understand, slowly and uncomfortably, that he is complicit in this system, that every pot and pan he sells to the German army, every bribe he pays to the SS, every profit he makes, is built on a foundation of unimaginable suffering. But Schindler does not yet act, not really. He continues his life of luxury and excess, continues to bribe and schmooze and charm his way through the Nazi bureaucracy, continues to make money. He is still, fundamentally, a Nazi profiteer. What changes him is not abstract knowledge of suffering, but direct, visceral, undeniable witness. And that witness comes on March 13, 1943, when the Nazis liquidate the Krakow ghetto. The liquidation begins at dawn. SS units, accompanied by Ukrainian auxiliary troops and German police, surround the ghetto and begin a systematic, street-by-street clearance operation. Orders are shouted in German. Doors are kicked open. Families are dragged from their homes and forced into the streets at gunpoint. The Nazis divide the Jews into two groups. Those who are healthy and capable of work are herded onto trucks and transported to the nearby Plazow labor camp. And those who are too old, too young, too sick, or too weak are shot on sight. The killing is indiscriminate and public. SS men walk down streets executing people in doorways, in courtyards, in front of their families. A child who cannot keep up with the march is shot in the head and left in the gutter. An elderly woman who moves too slowly is beaten with a rifle butt and then shot. A man who tries to hide in a cellar is discovered and killed along with everyone hiding with him. The streets run with blood. The air fills with gunfire and screaming, and through it all, the Nazis work with calm, methodical efficiency, as if they are not murdering human beings but simply clearing out garbage. Oskar Schindler watches the liquidation from a hillside overlooking the ghetto. He is there on horseback, accompanied by his mistress, having ridden out to the countryside for a romantic ride. They hear the gunfire and stop to see what is happening. From their vantage point, they have a clear view of the ghetto below, and they watch in horror as the massacre unfolds. Schindler sees a little girl, no more than 4 years old, wearing a red coat, wandering alone through the chaos. She is the only splash of color in a scene rendered in shades of grey by distance and smoke. She walks past bodies, past soldiers, past burning buildings, completely lost, completely alone, and Schindler cannot look away. He watches her until she disappears into a building, and even then he cannot move, cannot speak, cannot process what he is seeing. His mistress is weeping. Schindler is silent, his face pale, his hands gripping the reins so tightly his knuckles turn white. And in that moment, something inside him breaks. Not breaks in the sense of collapse, but breaks in the sense of breakthrough, as if a dam holding back his conscience has finally given way. He has seen evil before. He has profited from it, but he has never seen it like this, so raw, so casual, so utterly devoid of humanity. And he realizes in a way he never has before that the system he is part of is not just corrupt or cruel. It is genocidal. It is not designed to exploit Jews or control them. It is designed to annihilate them. And if he does nothing, if he continues to simply profit and look away, then he is not just complicit. He is guilty. Schindler rides back to Krakow in silence. That night he gets drunk, drinking bottle after bottle of vodka until he can barely stand. He does not sleep. When morning comes, he goes to his factory and he finds Itzhak Stern. He tells Stern what he saw, and then he says something that Stern will remember for the rest of his life. He says, "I want to do something. I want to help." Stern stares at him, unsure if Schindler is serious or if this is just the guilt-fueled rambling of a drunk. But over the following weeks, it becomes clear that Schindler is deadly serious. He begins to change the way he operates his factory. He starts bribing SS officers to allow him to expand his workforce, claiming he needs more laborers to meet military production quotas, when in reality, he is simply pulling Jews out of Plasso camp to save them from worse fates. He begins falsifying documents, listing rabbis and children and elderly people as essential skilled munitions workers, even though they have no idea how to operate a lathe or a press. He starts spending his personal fortune, not on luxuries, but on bribes to keep his workers alive. And he stops caring about profit. The factory which once made him rich becomes a front, a protective shield, a lifeboat disguised as a business. Oskar Schindler is no longer a war profiteer. He is something else now, something he never intended to be. He is a rescuer. Plasso concentration camp is built on the site of 2 Jewish cemeteries on the outskirts of Krakow, and the Nazis do not bother to remove the gravestones before construction begins. Instead, they use the tombstones as paving stones for roads and pathways, forcing Jewish prisoners to walk over the graves of their ancestors every day, a deliberate act of desecration that exemplifies the cruelty embedded in every aspect of Nazi camp design. Plasso is not an extermination camp like Auschwitz or Treblinka, where Jews are murdered immediately upon arrival. It is a labor camp, a place where prisoners are worked to death slowly, over months or years, rather than killed in gas chambers. But in practice, the difference is minimal. Prisoners at Plasso are starved, beaten, shot for the smallest infractions, and subjected to medical experiments and arbitrary executions. They sleep in overcrowded barracks infested with lice. They work 12 to 16 hours a day in stone quarries, construction sites and workshops, hauling rocks, building roads, producing goods for the German war effort. They are given almost no food, just thin soup and a piece of bread each day, not enough to sustain a human body under normal conditions, let alone under the backbreaking labor demanded of them. Disease is rampant. Death is routine, and presiding over it all, like a demon from a medieval painting, is SS Hauptsturm Führer Amon Goeth. Amon Goeth is the commandant of Plassau, and he is one of the most sadistic figures in the entire Nazi hierarchy. He is a massive man, over 6 feet tall and weighing well over 200 pounds, with a florid face, cold blue eyes, and a reputation for brutality that makes even other SS officers uncomfortable. Goeth lives in a villa overlooking the camp, and every morning he steps onto his balcony with a rifle and shoots prisoners at random, for sport, the way other men might shoot clay pigeons. He kills people for walking too slowly, for looking at him the wrong way, for no reason at all. He beats prisoners with his fists, his whip, his cane, often inflicting injuries so severe that his victims die hours or days later. He sets his 2 attack dogs, Rolf and Ralph, on prisoners, watching with amusement as the animals tear people apart. He hangs men from gallows in the camp square and forces the other prisoners to watch. He is a psychopath, a monster, and he is completely unaccountable, operating with total authority over the lives of the 6,000 Jews imprisoned in Plassau. To be sent to Plassau is to be sent to hell. And yet, for the Jews on Oskar Schindler's list, Plassau is a way station, a temporary horror before salvation. Schindler visits Plassau regularly, and he witnesses Goeth's cruelty firsthand. He sees the shootings, the beatings, the casual murders. He sees the bodies stacked like firewood. He sees the terror in the eyes of the prisoners, and he realizes that if he is going to save his workers, he needs to get them out of Plassau and into his factory permanently. So he launches a campaign of bribery, flattery, and manipulation targeting Amon Goeth himself. This is a dangerous game. Goeth is unpredictable, violent, and paranoid, and he could easily have Schindler arrested or killed if he suspects Schindler of undermining Nazi authority. But Schindler is a master manipulator, and he knows how to play men like Goeth. He brings Goeth expensive gift, cases of liquor, crates of cigars, black market luxury goods. He flatters Goeth, praising his efficiency, his authority, his power. He invites Goeth to parties, introduces him to beautiful women, gets him drunk, and makes him feel important. And slowly, carefully, he begins to buy Jews from Goeth, one at a time, paying bribes to have them transferred from Plassau to Amalia, where they will be safe, or at least safer. Each transaction is framed as a business deal, a transfer of labor to meet production quotas, but in reality it is a ransom, a life purchased with diamonds and cash. Goeth, for his part, sees Schindler as a fellow opportunist, a corrupt German who is using the war to get rich, and he enjoys Schindler's company because Schindler is fun, generous, and never moralizes. Goeth has no idea that Schindler despises him, that every smile, every toast, every friendly conversation is an act, a performance designed to save lives, and Schindler never breaks character. He drinks with Goeth, laughs at his jokes, listens to his racist rants, and all the while, he is calculating how much it will cost to save one more person, how many bottles of whiskey equal a human life, how many diamonds buy freedom from a concentration camp. It is exhausting, morally corrosive work, and it takes a toll on Schindler. He drinks more, he smokes more, he has nightmares, but he does not stop. By mid-1943, Schindler's factory has become a sanctuary. He has over 900 Jewish workers, and he treats them better than any other German factory owner in Poland. He feeds them more food than the official rations require, provides medical care, protects them from SS raids, and allows them to observe Jewish holidays in secret. The factory still produces enamelware, but barely. Schindler deliberately sabotages production, ensuring that his goods are shoddily made and often defective. So they will fail in the field and be of minimal use to the German military. He is committing treason and he knows it and he does not care, but Schindler's efforts are limited. He can only save the Jews who work in his factory, and there are thousands of others in Plazow and across Poland who have no protection, no wealthy German benefactor, no escape. The Nazi extermination machine is accelerating. The final solution is in full swing. Trains are leaving daily for Auschwitz, Sobibor, Treblinka, Belzec, Chelmno, delivering millions of Jews to their deaths in gas chambers. Schindler knows this. He knows that every day he delays, more people die. And he knows that if the Nazis discover what he is really doing, he will be arrested, tried, and executed. But he also knows that he cannot stop. He has crossed a line, and there is no going back. He is no longer Oskar Schindler, Nazi party member and war profiteer. He is Oskar Schindler, rescuer, protector, the man who turned his factory into an ark in the flood. And as the war grinds on and Germany begins to lose, Schindler realizes that he needs to take his rescue operation to the next level. He needs to create a list. By the summer of 1944, it is obvious to anyone paying attention that Germany is losing the war. The Allies have landed in Normandy, the Red Army is pushing west across Eastern Europe, and the Third Reich is collapsing under the weight of its own overreach and brutality. For the Jews trapped in Nazi-controlled territory, however, the collapse of Germany brings no relief. In fact, it makes things worse. As the Nazis retreat, they accelerate the final solution, desperate to murder as many Jews as possible before the Allies arrive. Concentration camps are liquidated, prisoners are marched to death, and anyone too weak to travel is shot on sight. In this chaos, Oskar Schindler sees both danger and opportunity. The danger is that his workers in Plazow will be sent to extermination camps. The opportunity is that the Nazi authorities, desperate for war production, might allow him to relocate his factory and his workers to a safer location. Schindler proposes to move his operation to Brinlitz, a town in the Sudetenland, in what is now the Czech Republic, far from the advancing Soviet front lines. He argues that the move is necessary to continue production of essential war materials. In reality, he is planning a rescue mission disguised as a business relocation. The Nazis approve the move, but with one critical condition. Schindler must submit a list of workers he will take with him, classified by their essential skills. Any Jew not on the list will remain in Plazow or be deported to Auschwitz. The list must be precise, detailed, and justified, and it will be reviewed by SS authorities to ensure no one is gaming the system. Schindler knows this is his chance. He also knows it is his responsibility. He sits down with Itzhak Stern, and together, over several agonizing days and nights, they compile the list. They start with Schindler's current workers, the 900 Jews already employed at Emalia. Then they begin adding names, people who are not workers but who are in danger, women, children, the elderly, the sick, rabbis, teachers, anyone they can think of who will die if left behind. Stern types the names carefully on a manual typewriter, each one a life, each one a gamble. They lie constantly. They list children as adult metal workers. They list rabbis as engineers. They list grandmothers as munitions specialists. They falsify everything, knowing that if the Nazis discover the deception, everyone on the list, and Schindler and Stern themselves, will be executed. But they also know that the SS officers reviewing the list are lazy, corrupt, and easily bribed. And Schindler hands out cash, diamonds, and luxury goods to ensure the list is approved without too much scrutiny. The final list contains 1,200 names, 1,200 Jews, 1,200 lives. It is typed on 13 pages, each page stamped with the official seal of Schindler's factory, and it becomes one of the most important documents in Holocaust history. Today, one of the original copies of Schindler's list is housed at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, preserved in a temperature-controlled vault, and visitors come from around the world to see it, to read the names, to understand that each name represents not just one person, but an entire lineage, generations of descendants who exist because Oskar Schindler chose to write their ancestors' names on a piece of paper. But in 1944, there is no time for reflection or sentimentality. The list is approved, barely, and preparations begin for the move to Brinlitz. The workers are loaded onto trains, packed into cattle cars, and transported west. But something goes horribly wrong. The train carrying the women and children is diverted, and instead of arriving in Brinlitz, it ends up at Auschwitz, Birkenau. The women and children, 300 of them, are unloaded on the platform, surrounded by SS guards and attack dogs, and marched toward the gas chambers. When Schindler learns of the diversion, he is frantic. He knows what Auschwitz means. He knows those women and children have hours, maybe minutes, before they are killed. He gets in his car and drives to Auschwitz, a journey of over 200 miles, through Soviet artillery fire and bombed-out roads. He arrives at the camp and demands to see the commandant. He is told the commandant is busy. Schindler waits, hours pass. He is told to leave. He refuses. Finally, he is granted an audience, and he walks into the commandant's office with a suitcase full of diamonds, cognac, and cash. He does not plead. He does not beg. He negotiates calmly and professionally as if discussing a business transaction. He offers bribes, makes promises, invokes his connections to high-ranking Nazi officials, and essentially ransoms 300 lives. The commandant agrees, not because he cares about the women and children, but because Schindler's bribe is too generous to refuse. The women and children are pulled from the barracks, loaded onto another train, and sent to Brinlitz. When they arrive, filthy, traumatized, and barely alive, Schindler is waiting for them. He greets them personally, shaking hands, learning names, welcoming them to safety. For many of these women, it is the first time in years that a German has treated them like human beings. They weep, Schindler weeps, and the factory, which is supposed to be producing armaments for the Wehrmacht, becomes instead a place of healing, survival, and defiance. The factory in Brinlitz is a scam. It is supposed to be a munitions plant producing artillery shells for the German army, but in 7 months of operation, it does not produce a single usable shell. Every piece of equipment is deliberately miscalibrated. Every batch of shells is intentionally defective, and Schindler spends enormous amounts of money purchasing finished goods on the black market, which he then passes off as his own production to satisfy Nazi inspectors. The deception is audacious and dangerous, and it only works because Schindler bribes everyone, from low-level clerks to high-ranking SS officers, ensuring that no one looks too closely at what is actually happening inside the factory. In truth, the factory is not a factory at all. It is a refugee camp, a hospital, a hiding place, a sanctuary. The workers are safe, fed, and protected, and they spend their days performing meaningless busywork designed to maintain the illusion of productivity. Schindler has transformed industrial production into kabuki theater, and the performance saves lives. Life in Brinlitz is not easy, but compared to Plazow or Auschwitz, it is paradise. Schindler allows the workers to observe Shabbat in secret, provides medical care for the sick, and ensures there is enough food to keep everyone alive. He visits the factory floor regularly, talking with workers, asking about their families, offering words of encouragement. He is no longer the distant, exploitative boss he was in Krakow. He is personally invested in every single person under his protection, and he spends his days and nights worrying about their survival. The strain is immense. Schindler is drinking heavily, smoking constantly, and aging rapidly under the weight of responsibility. His marriage to Emily is barely functional, though she is with him in Brinlitz, helping to care for the workers and running much of the factory's day operations. Emily is quietly heroic in her own right, nursing the sick, comforting the traumatized, and supporting Oskar even as he continues his affairs with other women. She is a saint married to a sinner, and she endures it all with grace. But the greatest challenge comes in the winter of 1945, when a transport train arrives at Brinlitz carrying a cargo of death. The train has come from Golstow, a subcamp of Auschwitz, and it contains over 100 Jewish prisoners. men who have been left to die in freezing cattle cars without food or water. The train is locked and forgotten at a siding near Brinlitz, and when Schindler learns of it, he orders his workers to break open the cars. What they find is beyond horror. The car floors are covered in frozen human waste, and bodies are piled on top of each other, some dead, some barely alive. The smell is indescribable. The survivors are skeletal, frostbitten, and catatonic. Schindler orders the men brought into the factory given warm baths, fed carefully to avoid shock from sudden food intake, and placed in beds with blankets. The local Nazi authorities protest. They say the men are too sick, too weak, that they should be shot and buried to prevent disease from spreading. Schindler refuses. He argues, he bribes, he threatens, and he saves them. Over a dozen men die anyway, despite Schindler's and Emily's efforts, and they are given Jewish burials in a small cemetery near the factory. The first Jews in that region to be buried with religious rites since the war began. Schindler attends the funerals, standing in the snow, bareheaded, as prayers are said in Hebrew. He does not understand the words, but he understands their meaning. He is bearing witness. He is refusing to let these deaths be anonymous. He is insisting, in the face of a genocidal machine that seeks to erase Jewish existence, that these people mattered. By early 1945, the war is nearly over. Soviet forces are closing in from the east, American forces from the west, and Germany is on the brink of total collapse. Schindler knows that when the Nazis retreat, they will likely execute all Jewish workers to eliminate witnesses to war crimes. He prepares for this by arming some of the workers with makeshift weapons and training them to resist if SS death squads arrive. He also establishes secret communication with approaching Allied forces, trying to arrange for protection. And then, on May 7, 1945, Germany surrenders. The war in Europe is over. The nightmare is ending. Schindler gathers his workers on the factory floor and tells them they are free. He thanks them for their trust. He apologizes for not doing more. And then he breaks down, sobbing, and speaks the words that will be remembered forever. That he could have saved more. That every luxury he enjoyed, every indulgence, every extravagance, could have been traded for more lives. The workers present him with the gold ring, the message in Hebrew, and the knowledge that he saved 1,200 people. But Schindler does not feel like a hero. He feels like a failure, haunted by the people he didn't save, the names he didn't add to the list, the opportunities he missed. It is a guilt that will follow him for the rest of his life. Oskar Schindler flees Germany on May 9, 1945, just hours after saying goodbye to his workers. He is accompanied by Emily and a small group of Jewish workers who volunteer to escort him to safety. Afraid that Soviet or Polish forces will arrest or kill him for being a German and a Nazi Party member, they drive west toward the American lines, navigating bombed-out roads, avoiding Soviet patrols, and sleeping in abandoned barns. Schindler is dressed in a prisoner's uniform given to him by his workers, with a letter written in Hebrew and German explaining who he is and what he did. A plea for mercy that he hopes will protect him if they are stopped. They make it to the American zone without incident, and Schindler is briefly detained, questioned, and then released. The Americans are not interested in prosecuting him. They have bigger war criminals to hunt. Schindler is free, but he is also broke, homeless, and emotionally destroyed. He has spent his entire fortune, over 4 million Reichsmarks, roughly $40 million in today's money, on bribes, food, and black market goods to keep his workers alive. He has nothing left. Schindler and Emily attempt to restart their lives in Germany, but it is impossible. Post-war Germany is in ruins, occupied by Allied forces, struggling with food shortages, and overwhelmed by millions of refugees and displaced persons. Schindler tries to start a business, but he is terrible at it. He has no capital, no connections, and no ability to function in a world without corruption and bribery. Every venture fails. He and Emily live in poverty, moving from one cheap apartment to another, surviving on charity from Jewish aid organizations. In 1949, They emigrate to Argentina, hoping to start fresh in a country far from the ruins of Europe. Schindler tries his hand at farming, raising chickens and nutria, a type of rodent bred for fur. It is a disaster. The farm fails. He loses money. He drinks heavily, falls deeper into debt, and becomes increasingly bitter and depressed. Emily, exhausted by decades of Oskar's infidelity, alcoholism, and inability to provide, finally separates from him, though they never officially divorce. She remains in Argentina, living in poverty for the rest of her life, largely forgotten by history, while Oskar returns to Germany alone in 1958, a broken, bankrupt man who once saved 1,200 lives and now cannot even support himself. Back in Germany, Schindler survives on handouts from Jewish organizations and the small pensions sent to him by Schindler-Juden, the survivors he saved, who never forget what he did for them. He lives in a tiny apartment in Frankfurt, drinks too much, smokes too much, and drifts through life without purpose or direction. He tries to start a cement factory. It fails. He tries to start a business selling luxury goods. It fails. Everything he touches turns to failure, as if the universe is punishing him for his wartime success. He is honored by Jewish communities, invited to Israel, celebrated as a hero, but he cannot reconcile the praise with his own guilt and self-loathing. He does not feel like a hero. He feels like a man who profited from genocide, who could have done more, who saved 1,200 people when he could have saved 1,300, 1,400, 2,000. The guilt consumes him, and he drowns it in alcohol, smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day, neglecting his health, spiraling into depression and isolation. In 1962, the State of Israel officially recognizes Oskar Schindler as righteous among the nations, an honor given to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. A tree is planted in his name at Yad Vashem, and he is invited to Jerusalem, where he is greeted as a hero, embraced by the people he saved, celebrated in newspapers and on television. For a brief moment, Schindler feels something close to redemption. He visits Israel multiple times over the following years, and each time he is surrounded by Schindler-Juden and their children, who shower him with gratitude, affection, and financial support. They pay for his travels, his medical expenses, his living costs. They refuse to let him die in poverty, but the visits are bittersweet. Schindler is happy to see the survivors, happy to meet their children and grandchildren, happy to know that his actions created life. But he is also haunted. Every survivor reminds him of the people he didn't save, the names not on the list, the millions who died. And the praise, the adulation, the hero worship. It all feels undeserved to him, a cruel joke, a reminder of his own moral failure. By the late 1960s, Schindler's health is declining rapidly. He is overweight, diabetic, suffering from liver disease and heart problems, and still drinking and smoking despite doctors' warnings. He lives alone, estranged from Emily, estranged from his family, sustained only by the financial support of the Schindler-Juden and the occasional visits from survivors who travel to Germany to see him. He is lonely, depressed, and dying slowly. On October 9, 1970, at the age of 66, Oskar Schindler suffers a heart attack in his apartment in Hildesheim, Germany. He dies alone, just another forgotten old man in a country that has moved on from the war and wants to forget men like him. His death is barely noticed by the German press. There are no state funerals, no official honors, no grand memorials. But the Schindler-Juden do not forget. They arrange for his body to be flown to Israel, and he is buried in the Catholic cemetery on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, the only former Nazi Party member to be honored with burial in the Holy Land. The funeral is attended by hundreds of Schindler-Juden, men and women Schindler saved, now in their 50s and 60s, some traveling from across the world to pay their respects. They weep openly, placing stones on his grave according to Jewish tradition, and they speak of the man who gave them life. Many of them bring their children and grandchildren, introducing them to Schindler's grave, telling them stories of the war, of the factory, of the list, of the German who risked everything to save them. And those children bring their children, and the story is passed down through generations, an unbroken chain of memory, gratitude, and life. Today, Oskar Schindler's grave is one of the most visited sites in Jerusalem, covered in stones left by visitors from around the world, a pilgrimage site for people who want to honor the man who proved that even in the darkest times, even in the heart of evil, one person can make a difference. The number is almost impossible to comprehend. 1,200 people saved, 8,500 descendants alive today, 79 years after the end of World War II, and the number keeps growing. Every year, more children are born to the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Schindler's Jews, each one a living rebuke to the Nazi plan to exterminate European Jewry, each one a testament to the power of one man's decision to act. Demographers estimate that if current birth rates continue, by the year 2050, there will be over 200,000 descendants of Schindler's 1,200, 250,000 people who exist because Oskar Schindler chose conscience over complicity. It is a staggering legacy, and it is entirely unintentional. Schindler did not save Jews to create a legacy or to be remembered. He saved them because, in the moment, he could not do otherwise, because witnessing the Krakow ghetto liquidation broke something inside him, because Itzhak Stern and his workers awakened a conscience Schindler didn't know he had, because once he started saving lives, he could not stop. And now, decades after his death, his impact ripples outward, unstoppable, a wave of life spreading across the world. The Schindler Juden, those original 1,200 survivors, spent the rest of their lives telling Schindler's story. They wrote letters, gave interviews, attended commemorations, and made sure that history remembered not just the Holocaust's horrors, but also the rare individuals who resisted. In 1982, Australian novelist Thomas Keneally published a historical novel titled Schindler's Ark, later retitled Schindler's List in the United States, based on extensive interviews with survivors. The book became an international bestseller and introduced Schindler's story to millions of readers. But it was Steven Spielberg's 1990 film Schindler's List that transformed Oskar Schindler into a global icon. The film, shot in stark black and white, portrayed Schindler as a flawed but ultimately heroic figure, and it won 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. Audiences around the world watched Liam Neeson's portrayal of Schindler breaking down at the end of the war, sobbing that he could have saved more, and they wept with him. The film became required viewing in schools, a cultural touchstone, a reminder of the Holocaust's horrors and the importance of individual moral courage. And for the Schindler Juden and their descendants, it was validation, a confirmation that the world knew and remembered what Oskar Schindler had done. But Schindler's legacy is complicated, and it raises difficult questions. Was he a hero? Absolutely. Was he a good man? That's harder to answer. He was an adulterer, an alcoholic, a failed businessman who spent the last decades of his life in poverty and obscurity. He profited from Jewish slave labor before he protected it. He joined the Nazi Party, worked as a spy for German intelligence, and benefited from the Aryanization policies that stole Jewish property. He was not a saint. He was not morally pure. He was a deeply flawed human being who, when confronted with unimaginable evil, chose to resist it, even though resistance cost him everything, and perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the lesson of Oskar Schindler is not that heroes are perfect, but that heroism is possible even for imperfect people, that morality is not about who you are, but about what you do when it matters most. Schindler did not start the war as a hero. He became one, slowly, reluctantly, and at great personal cost. And that transformation, that arc from selfish profiteer to selfless rescuer, is what makes his story so powerful and so important. The Schindler Juden never forgot him. Even in his darkest years, when he was broke and alone in Germany, They supported him financially, visited him, wrote to him, and made sure he knew that his sacrifices were not forgotten. They invited him to their weddings, their children's bar mitzvahs, their family gatherings. They introduced him to their grandchildren, telling them, "This is the man who saved your grandmother, your grandfather, your entire family." And Schindler, for all his flaws, never asked for anything in return. He never demanded recognition, never sought wealth or fame from his wartime actions, never tried to profit from the story. In fact, he was often uncomfortable with the praise, insisting that he had only done what anyone should have done, that the real heroes were the people who suffered and survived. He was wrong about that. Not everyone did what Schindler did. Most people, when faced with the choice between profit and principle, between safety and risk, between complicity and resistance, chose the easier path. Schindler chose the harder one, and it saved lives. Today, the story of Oskar Schindler is taught in schools around the world as part of Holocaust education. His factory in Krakow is a museum visited by hundreds of thousands of people every year. His grave in Jerusalem is a pilgrimage site. His name is synonymous with rescue, with resistance, with the idea that one person can make a difference even in the face of overwhelming evil. But the real legacy of Oskar Schindler is not a museum or a grave or a movie. It is the people. It is the 1,200 Jews he saved, now long dead, who lived full lives, had children, built families, and passed on their stories. It is the 8,500 descendants alive today, living in Israel, the United States, Europe, South America, Australia, ordinary people with ordinary lives who would not exist if not for a Nazi party member who decided to be something more than what his party demanded. And it is the 200,000 descendants who will exist by 2050, 250,000 people, an entire city's worth of humanity, all tracing their existence back to 13 pages of typed names, to a list compiled in desperation and hope, to a man who, in the end, gave everything. He had to save lives he would never profit from, lives he would never fully appreciate, lives that would outlive him and outlast him and become his only true monument. This is the question that historians, psychologists, and moral philosophers have debated for decades. What made Oskar Schindler change? How does a man go from being a Nazi profiteer, a member of Hitler's party, a spy for German intelligence, a womanizing alcoholic who exploited Jewish labor for personal gain, to a rescuer who risked his life and spent his entire fortune, saving over 1,200 Jews from the Holocaust? There is no simple answer, no single moment of conversion, no blinding light on the road to Damascus. Schindler himself never fully explained it. In interviews after the war, he was often vague, uncomfortable, unwilling, or unable to articulate his motivations. He said things like, "I knew the people who worked for me. When you know people, you have to behave toward them like human beings." But that explanation is incomplete. Plenty of Germans knew Jews personally and still participated in their persecution. Plenty of factory owners employed Jewish workers and treated them as expendable. Knowing people is not enough. Something else had to happen inside Oskar Schindler, something deeper, something that transformed him from complicit bystander to active rescuer. Some historians argue that the turning point was the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto in March 1943, the moment Schindler watched from the hillside and saw the little girl in the red coat wandering alone through the massacre. That image haunted him for the rest of his life, and in Spielberg's film, it is portrayed as the moment Schindler's conscience awakens. There is truth to this. Witnessing atrocity firsthand is different from knowing about it abstractly, and the visceral horror of watching children being shot in the streets clearly affected Schindler in a profound way, but the transformation was not instant. Schindler did not immediately become a rescuer after witnessing the ghetto liquidation. He continued to operate his factory, continued to profit, continued to live his life of luxury for months afterward. The change was gradual, a slow accumulation of guilt, empathy, and moral clarity that built over time until it reached a tipping point where inaction became unbearable. Other historians emphasize the role of Itzhak Stern, Schindler's Jewish accountant and moral compass. Stern was brilliant, cautious, and deeply committed to saving as many Jews as possible, and he used his position to subtly manipulate Schindler, bringing him workers who were at risk, asking him to hire people who were too old or too young or too sick to be productive, framing it always in terms of business necessity but always with the underlying message: you have the power to save lives and you should use it. Stern never lectured Schindler, never moralized, never made him feel guilty. Instead, he treated Schindler as a partner, a co-conspirator, someone whose better instincts could be nurtured and encouraged. And slowly, over months and years, Stern's influence worked. Schindler began to see his workers not as labor units, but as individuals with names, families, histories, and futures. He began to care about them, to feel responsible for them, and eventually to risk everything to protect them. Stern was the architect of Schindler's transformation, the man who built the scaffolding around Schindler's conscience and allowed it to grow. But there is also a simpler, less romantic explanation. Oskar Schindler was a narcissist, and saving Jews gave him a sense of importance, power, and moral superiority that nothing else in his life had ever provided. He was a failed businessman, a failed husband, a failed son, a man who had accomplished nothing of significance before the war. And then, suddenly, he had the power of life and death. He could save people. He could be a hero, and the gratitude, the adulation, the love he received from the Jews he saved fed his ego in a way that money and mistresses never could. This theory is cynical, and it is uncomfortable, but it may contain a kernel of truth. Schindler loved being loved. He loved the parties, the toasts, the tearful thank yous, the sense that he was special, important, irreplaceable. He loved being the center of attention, and saving Jews put him at the center of attention in a way that nothing else did. Does this make his actions less heroic? No. The lives he saved are no less real, no less valuable, regardless of his motivations. But it complicates the narrative, and it reminds us that heroism is rarely pure, rarely selfless, rarely untainted by ego, ambition, or personal need. The truth is probably that all of these factors played a role. Schindler changed because he witnessed atrocity, because Itzhak Stern guided him, because his conscience awakened, because he craved significance, because he was capable of empathy, because he was bored with being.